Hi, this is Pastor Joe Green, head pastor of Antioch Assembly Church located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, also the founder of the 2019 movement. And I want to share a couple of thoughts with you today. I want to encourage each and every one of you who is watching this. God has a great plan and a great destiny for everybody. Every single person was made in God's image and has value. They have a purpose, and their purpose is great because God gave it to them. They have a value because their value comes from God, no matter what anybody tells you. And so, with that in mind, I want to discuss something that that is really more and more prevalent than people would probably want to believe. So, I'm going to address the God of the gaps thing, and the reason I want to do this is because we live in a more and more secular society. Our society has become so secularized and so anti-God that sometimes it's so subtle that we fall into the trap even before we really recognize it. And so I was listening to an announcer not long ago, a pretty popular figure, and he started saying things like, if you believe in the Bible, it's you're stupid. I'm paraphrasing. You're stupid, or if you deny science or deny evolution, then you're a nut job, and that's pretty much the sentiment that we see more and more in the society that we live in. And the reason not that is a new dynamic or a new occurrence. That has always been the case, that people felt that way. But the difference is society as a whole it embraces that type of mentality. If you'd have looked 30 or 40 years ago, some of the stuff that they say on television and in the media and in the public sector, they would be castigated. They would be, shouted down. Nobody would go for it. Or, other than having free speech, which we all have under the First Amendment of the Constitution, it wouldn't be widely accepted by the public at large. And that's the primary difference. Our society has become so anti-God, so anti-Christ, and so secularized that now the things that used to be the minority opinion is presented as the majority opinion. And so when you have people that denounce the Bible and denounce Christians and those who believe in God as being stupid or foolish or nutty, as they try to paint us to be, it just shows how the society and the culture as a whole is degrading. And the Bible talks about this over and over again. So there's this term called the God of the gaps. And what the God of the gaps is, I'll read the definition and then I'll give my little spin on it. The God of the gaps is a term used to describe observations of theological perspectives in which gaps in scientific knowledge are taken to be evidence or proof of God's existence. The gaps usage was made by Christian theologians not to discredit theism, but rather to point out the fallacy of relying on theological arguments for God's existence. Some use the phrase as a criticism of theological positions to mean that God is used as a spurious explanation for anything not currently explained by science. The God of the gaps implies that there is no scientific evidence for God, and that to believe in the God of the Bible is to ignore real science. But I submit to you that it takes more blind faith not to believe in God than to believe in God. As a matter of fact, the Bible says that a fool says in his heart that there's no God. And why do I say this? I say this because people that they are promoting a specific ideology, and I would submit to you that this is a religion. People that try to denounce the Bible or to say that science contradicts the Bible, or that if you believe in God, it means that you don't acknowledge real science. And for several reasons. The one is, the Bible itself, it tells us that all creation confirms or verifies that there's a creator. When you look at creation itself, creation, more specifically the world that we see, and human beings, the body, the universe, all these things demonstrate or confirm the fact that there is a designer. There's purpose, there's an intelligence, and there's design. And so when you have those factors in place, then there must be an intelligent designer who designed things for a purpose. Now, we also talk about God as a person. That is, we need to define God as a person, not as a thing, or not as energy, or the Gnostics sometimes the ether, or the universe, this very vague term that they try to use for God. God is a person. It means he has a personality. And so you have to look at God that way, because If you don't, then God is just a force, as I've heard him use. I've heard him defined as nothing random ever creates anything in order. So nothing that is orderly and has design and intelligence comes from randomness. That never happens. Nowhere in nature do you see something very specific that came from something very random. And what do I mean by that? I mean that if I took a whole bunch of letters, if I took 100,000 letters and threw them up in the air, they would never create a novel. If I took a whole bunch of cards and threw them up in the air, they wouldn't fall into a perfectly designed house of cards. Because we understand that nothing that is specific, nothing that has a purpose, nothing that has a design comes from randomness. But what they would have you to believe is that the universe itself came from randomness. Just the Big Bang Theory says that there was nothing and all of a sudden there's a big explosion, the Big Bang, and that everything that we see in the universe fell into place. And when you say that that's impossible, they would say, but it took billions and billions and trillions of years for that to happen. It wouldn't matter how long it is, that nothing orderly and with design comes from randomness. Randomness never creates order. Never. It doesn't happen. Nothing is just by coincidence that fell into place. And when you understand the intricacies of the universe and the expansive nature of the universe, when you look at your human body and how specific you were created with hundreds of millions of strands of DNA. That shows intelligence, it shows design, and it shows purpose. And therefore, there has to be a person behind that, and we call him God or Yahweh. You don't have to, and this is the cheat, if you will, that the non-believers, you have atheists and agnostics. So atheist denies that there's a God, and agnostic says that he doesn't have enough information, he or she doesn't have enough information to say whether or not there is a God. So what they would do is they would say to you that because you can't give specifics about God, you can't see specifics about God, that he can't exist. But think about it this way. If I walked into a room and there was a coffee mug sitting on the table, I wouldn't have to know the name, the height, the weight, the age, or anything about the person that said it there to know that a person said it there. So therefore, if we see a creation which has purpose, intelligence, and design, and detail, when we see these things, you shouldn't have to know all the specifics about the one who created it to know that there is one that created it. And so that's where their theory falls through the cracks. The actual laws of science, and they will deny it because they try to say that if you believe in a creator, if you believe in God, if you believe in what the Bible says, that it means that you don't care or you ignore science. But I'm here to submit to you today that the actual laws of science confirm that there has to be a creator that exists outside of the universe. Why do I say that? The fourth law of physics is the law of atrophy. The law of atrophy says that a substance or material would stay in its present state unless an outside force is introduced to change it from one state to another. Therefore, if the universe was lying dormant and didn't have any order, just some random molecules, nothing would cause these molecules, or whatever they call it, primordial soup, some of the evolutionists say, nothing would cause it to change from one form of matter to another unless it's some outside force. But because the universe is the totality of the known creation, there is no outside force based on science. If you understand the laws of inertia that says an object or matter at rest stays at rest unless an outside force is introduced. And so an outside force would have had to have been introduced in order for the universe to change from nothingness to somethingness, to something, if you will. Of course, we know that to be God. And of course, again, you don't have to know his name. You don't have to know how tall he is, how old he is, or anything about him to know that there is a God out there who created everything that we see. Because there's intelligence, there's design, there's purpose, and there's specificity. Secular science, most of you may or may not realize, is actually a religion. It's known as Hermeticism or alchemy. And it's an ancient religion that they believe, that Gnostics believe, that the fallen angels taught to humanity. And so when you think about Mount Hermon, which is one of the mountains in the ancient world, they believe that that's where the fallen angels came and began to teach men scientific law. So you have Hermeticism, you have alchemy. That's what our modern science is based on. And it's actually a religion because they believe that these spiritual beings, these fallen angels, are the ones that taught it to humanity. In Genesis 3, we see the great deception, which Lucifer, the devil or Satan, whatever you want to call him, who is a fallen angel, actually comes and gives this secret knowledge to Adam and Eve. And so that is the philosophy behind our modern science, which is why most secular modern scientists don't introduce God or the Bible into the equation. And it's very important for these agnostics or atheists or Gnostics, if you will, it's very important for them to separate God from science, because if we acknowledge that God is the creator who created everything that we see with intelligence, with purpose, we have to know that he's greater than us, and because of that, we would therefore be obligated to seek him, to worship him, and to give him the credit that he deserves. So because they don't want to do that, they want to be their own gods, or they want another entity to be God. Because of that, they have to separate logic and science from actual acknowledgement of God as creator. And so because of this philosophy, and the reason I want to attack this today, and I want to encourage you today, because they want to convince you that life is random and everything is coincidental. And it's a very depressing thought, if you will. There's a lot of people that's out here in the world that's very depressed. They don't have a way in life. They don't really see any purpose behind life. And these people fall into depression. Some of them become suicidal. Some of them just become so amoral or antisocial that they do harmful things to people, or they become very callous and just have no regard for human life. But once we are able to declare and determine that there is a God who created everybody in his image and has given every human being a purpose, it should change how we look at each other. Because the Bible says that God is love, and those who love God also have to love human beings. The Bible asks the question, how can you say you love God who you've never seen, but yet love your neighbor who you see every day? Right? So what the enemy is trying to do is the enemy needs to take away the authority of God, because if God is creator, then he is the final authority. He is the sovereign ruler of the universe, and therefore he deserves to be placed in a place of authority. And when that happens, you can't separate him from any aspect of life. You can't separate him from government. You can't separate him from the public sector. You can't even separate him from your personal life if you acknowledge that he is the giver of life and therefore the authority over each and every one of our lives. The very encouraging thing about it is once we acknowledge God, who's a creator, who created you with purpose, and in his image, he created you, that you're not a coincidence, that you're not a mistake, that you are ordained to be here by God. Once you acknowledge that, and once you start to live your life in accordance to those principles that God has given us, and you desire to develop a relationship with him, it not only should change how you look at your life, you should begin to live life with purpose. It's an antidepressant, if you will, but it also shapes how you address other people. And so we live in a world that's become very callous, that's become very wicked. And the Bible talks about how in the last days men will be lovers of themselves, and they will be without compassion for other people. And that usually happens because people begin to reject God and become prideful, because at the end of the day, they are the center of their own universe. You have to recognize that human secularism is also a religion, because what human secularism says is that human beings are the center of all things and the final authority, which means a human secularist actually believes themselves to be God, because they are the center of their own universe. And that's a very dangerous thought, but it's not a new one. It's one that the enemy has convinced Adam and Eve. He says if you eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you'll be just like God, and you'll be able to determine what's right and what's wrong. And that's the type of world that we live in. It's becoming more and more secular. That we don't acknowledge God. We want to separate God from even how we govern other people, or how we live our lives, or how we teach our children, because real science seeks after the answers to how things are happening. So when you see order, when you see design, science should lead you to the fact that there is a person behind the laws of the universe, and they're not random or by happenstance. Romans chapter 8 verse 28 says, or reads, "And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. For whom he foreknew, he did predestinate to be conformed in the image of his Son, that he may be firstborn among many brethren." God's desire for you is for you to come into the knowledge of him through his Son, Jesus Christ. And because of that, he puts things in your path, right? Even the trials and tribulations that you face in life, they're not outside of God's purview. God is not caught off guard by the struggles that you face in life, but he's using those things to bring you not only into a knowledge of him, but also to be conformed into the image of his Son. And so I thank God for the opportunity to share this with you. I pray that you share this, subscribe to my YouTube channel. I just wanted to encourage you today and pass the message along, because the Bible tells us to preach the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ to every nation, every tribe, and every tongue, so that we all may know that there is a God who created everything, who rules over everything, but more importantly, who desires that you be known to him and to know you. Be blessed of the Lord.
My name is Gerald Schroeder. I have a, thank God, a strong science background from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, bachelor's, master's, PhD, 7 years in the physics staff. Seen a whole range of atomic bombs detonated, moved to Israel, met my wife, Barbara Sofer, a great writer, and then teach Torah and science. So luckily, I'm lucky that I have the two that come together. And one of the questions that I'm asked as a scientist is, how can a scientist really believe that there's something what we refer to usually as God? You know, is this metaphysical whatever acting in the world or producing the world? And the irony is, the question's really a non-starter. Science has in fact discovered God, and you can talk to the hardline atheists and they will say, it looks like science has indeed discovered God. And how would that be? Well, if you take the trouble of going to the web and there type in WMAP, the initials for a satellite, it's a diagram that shows the development of the universe from the creation over time. It's a timeline. Every word on that diagram comes from the NASA site. It is the condensed knowledge of the scientific community of how the universe created and how it got to where we are today. Each of the lines, the vertical lines, is another billion years. Okay, you start from a burst of energy at the extreme left side of the diagram, and you end up at the far end with the oval. The oval is to indicate expansion in all directions. Of course, because it's a timeline, we can't show that on a single piece of paper. We see here, most amazingly, that on the extreme left edge, it shows a beginning to the universe. Now go back less than 50 years. If I were teaching that at Tech, a person could lose tenure saying that there was a creation of the universe. It sounds like it's Bible, because less than 50 years ago, the overwhelming scientific opinion was the universe is eternal. There was never a beginning. The Bible is wrong from the very first sentence. And then we discovered, suddenly, Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson, the Bell Labs in New Jersey, the northeast of the US, discovered the echo of the Big Bang, the energy left over, which George Gamow, 60 years ago, predicted that if there had been a universe created hot and small, it would have exploded, and the energy would get more and more dilute. And Penzias and Wilson, these Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson, discover this energy that had been predicted overnight. The Bible got it right. There was a beginning to the universe. Now, the black in the diagram is nothing. It's not a vacuum. Vacuums are within that diagram, within that cone of expansion. Vacuums are empty space, and space is something. The black of the paper around the diagram is nothing. It doesn't fit in our human brain, because humans think in a box made of time, space, and matter/energy. No human, as clever as they might be, as expansive as they might be, thinks out of that box. So when we say outside that diagram is nothing, we can use the words, but we can't conceive of nothing. It doesn't fit in the human brain. How are we going to have this idea, is there a God or not? Notice that the creation force isn't a three-letter word, G-O-D. If you look at the words carefully, it's a quantum fluctuations. That understanding was first brought down by Ed Tryon brilliant human being, in the journal Nature, almost 40 years ago. The universe allows creation of something from nothing, provided you have the laws of nature, quantum fluctuation. Trivan realized, and he published in the journal Nature, one of the 2 leading peer-reviewed journals in the world, that you can create something from absolute nothing, provided you've got the laws of nature, quantum physics and the laws of relativity. In other words, the laws of nature. So look what science has discovered. We can create the universe from absolute nothing, provided we have the forces of nature. Now, the laws of nature, the forces of nature aren't physical, they act on the physical. So if they create the universe, that means they predate the universe. So now we have a set of forces, we call them the laws of nature, that are not physical, that are able to act on the physical. They create the physical from absolute nothing. And they predate the universe, which means they predate our understanding of time. Put that together, it sounds very familiar. If you haven't noticed it, that's the biblical definition of God. There's only one nuance that's left hanging, we can talk about it another time perhaps, is that which created the universe, those forces active in the universe. But up to that point, science says you are correct. The definition of the biblical God is predates time, outside of time. God is not a physical being, is a force, and it creates the universe. You'll notice that the opening chapter of Genesis, the only name for God is Elohim, God as manifest in the universe. Science has indeed discovered the biblical God. Well, we just need one part left, crucial. That which created the universe is also active in the universe itself. The very fact that you're watching this now pretty much establishes that point.